welcome back to my books channel. I haven't filmed a video for this channel in a while, I think. I'm really sorry. I do aim to be really consistent with this channel, but I don't earn any money on this channel, and I earn all my money on my other channel, so sadly the other channel does have to take precedent. So when things get busy, as it always does when you're a YouTuber around March, April time, I have to prioritise. I'm sorry, even though I do want to be talking about books more. I'm also feeling a bit uninspired with this channel. It's really hard when you've got one channel that gets views. I was about to say lots of views. My other channel doesn't get lots of views, but that's what pays my bills, you know? And then this channel, I'm not getting as many views, there's not as much interaction, and then I automatically feel what's the word? Discouraged because of that. But then I've got to remind myself I don't do this channel for the views, I don't do it for the money because I don't earn any money on this channel. I do it because I want to talk about books. But it's when you're a YouTuber, it's just hard to get into that mindset. But also I feel I'm boring. I feel I'm doing the same video ideas over and over again. I don't know, am I thinking too deeply about it? I think I probably am. That's who I am. I'm an overthinker. I overthink everything, and then I get myself into this hole that I can't get out of. Does anybody care about this? Probably not. Let's get into the video. This is going to be 10 books I've read recently, or actually I think it's more than 10 books today, but we're gonna breeze over some of these for reasons that you will find. I love to do these videos because I really like to talk about every single book that I read. I love to give my reviews on everything, and this is kind of the best way to do it. But I also do think that's another reason why I feel uninspired for other video ideas, because I've already talked about all the books that I've read. So when it comes to other videos, I'm nobody cares about this because they've already heard. I'm just going through it. About every 6 months or so, I really start to doubt my career. I really start to wonder what the heck I'm doing. Should I go out and get a proper 9-to-5 job? And then I'm no, I don't know. I'm going through that right now. You might be able to tell. I also use this channel apparently as my therapy session. But anyway, let's get into the first book that I read. I haven't done one of these videos in ages. So the first book I think is Ophelia After All by Raquel Marie. This is a YA teenage coming out book, and it is absolutely adorable. This book just feels like being a teenager. It is over dramatic, it is ridiculous at points, but it is just you're in the mind of a teenage girl. I do struggle now with YA books sometimes because being not a YA myself, I'm nearly 29 years old, the teenage drama, it just bothers me because I'm this is so easily fixed with communication. That is the number one skill I've learned as an adult. Communication is so important. People aren't mind readers. You've got to say what you're thinking. But this book, I didn't really mind the drama because it was so realistic. I can see how teenagers get themselves into the kind of hole that Ophelia did in this book. Oh, did you hear that? That is a rhubarb screaming to get in because I've dared to close the office door. Should we go let her in? Yes, you're coming in. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I closed the... Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to close the door. Oh, and then she goes straight back out again. You're gonna in or out? Okay, should I leave it open just a crack so you can come in and out? Okay, there you go. Door's open a crack. How dare I close the office door? She's very upset about it. As I was saying, our main character in this book is Ophelia Rojas. She is a Cuban? Yes, she's a Cuban teenage girl. And she is a romantic at heart. And Ophelia's, in the past few months, gone through a really dramatic breakup with her boyfriend. And it's all consuming in the way that it is for teenage girls. Rhubarb, you're really in the way. And that is Ophelia's main personality trait. That's how everyone knows her. She is boy mad Ophelia. She is romantic Ophelia. And all people want to talk to Ophelia about is boys and the fact that she is boy mad. That is her defining personality trait. Sorry, I forgot to put my computer on mute. She is just crazy here today. So much is going on. What was I saying? That is her defining personality trait. She is boy mad Ophelia. And then she gets a crush on a girl and everything just like flips on its head. She suddenly hates being known as like boy crazy Ophelia, but she doesn't know how to like change people's perceptions of her. She doesn't want to disappoint people when she comes out. And there's a quote in this book which I wrote it down. I should have just written down the page number so I could like read from here, but I didn't. I actually wrote it down in my notebook when I was reading this book. The quote says, "When you've known someone for years and they build up this image of you, it's hard to talk about things that mess with that image. It feels like you're breaking some bond of trust between you and that person by being different than you were before." And when I read that quote, I literally cried because I've never before had my thoughts and my feelings and my experience of coming out like so perfectly put into words. I really struggled with years with the idea of coming out with the idea of coming out to my family. I was out to all my friends, but I just couldn't say the words out loud. And even now I struggle to like say the words to my family, even though I've been in a 3-year long relationship with a girl now. And of course they know that. But it's just this idea of like disappointing people who have known you your entire life. These people who love you looking at you entirely differently. And I really struggle with that, and I still do. And I thought that was just like a me experience, but the fact that it is in this book shows me that's not just a me experience. That might be a universal thing. And for that reason, I feel like this book is really important. In terms of the actual like writing style, I have only given it a 4 stars. I feel like it did lack a bit of direction at some points. It was quite slow to start. Like it took me a while to like really get into like the meat of the book. There just like wasn't really much going on that made me compelled to like keep reading until you're like quite a significant way into the book, I found. The main storyline in this book is about prom. It's about like Ophelia and her friendship group finding people to go to prom with, and it is very teenage girly, but that is the target audience of this book. I'm not gonna lie and say like this is really suitable for adults. I don't really feel like it is a very adult book, but for teenagers, I would have loved this when I was a teenager. Her entire friendship group feels like really fleshed out. Like Ophelia's not the only like 3D character in this book. Her entire friendship group all have like thoughts and feelings and personalities of their own, which I really loved. There is so much queer rep in this book from right across the spectrum. I do find sometimes, especially in YA books, it can feel quite convoluted and quite forced trying to like get all that representation in. This one doesn't feel like that at all. It feels like a really natural, really sort of, it feels right. And a lot of the time, it's this thing, I saw a lot of reviews of this book online saying like, oh yeah, it makes sense, all of Ophelia's friendship group is queer because like queer people naturally like gravitate towards queer people, like every queer person has a queer group of friends. That is so not my experience with life. Like I am the only queer in the village. There are no other queers in Reading. I've desperately tried to make a queer friendship group. It's just not happening, so it's just me and my straights. But I do really like that in this book. What else have I written? There's lots of conversations around race and identity in this book, with Ophelia being a Cuban woman, Cuban teenager, girl. I suppose it doesn't really matter, does it? And then I really should have... oh no, bad things are happening. And then I read Watching You by Lisa Jewell. I generally do really enjoy a Lisa Jewell book. I love The Family Upstairs and The Family Remains. Family Remains. I love both those books. I think I've read another one by Lisa Jewell as well, which I quite enjoyed. Maybe I haven't, can't remember. This one was very middle of the road, average. I gave this 3 stars. It just fell a little bit flat for me. I wasn't really that enthralled by the mystery element of this book, and seeing as this is a mystery book, that's a big check mark against it. Without the mystery element of this book, it is literally just like a character study, and I really struggle with character studies. I need a plot to keep me turning those pages. I'm a plot girly through and through. So you find out really early on in this book that somebody's been attacked. You don't know who's been attacked. You don't know why they've been attacked. You don't know who is the one doing the attacking. You don't know if this person is dead or alive. You have no idea. You just know something bad has happened. And then the book goes on to introduce you to this quite extensive cast of characters who you come to find out are all like potential suspects in this attack. The main character here is a woman called Joey. Joey has just moved in with her brother, her brother's wife, and her husband into this like terraced housing. I can't even remember. I think, is it Bristol? I can't remember. She's moved in with her brother and his wife and her husband, essentially. And Joey doesn't really have a lot going on in her life. She actually works at a children's soft play centre, which is really funny because I worked at a children's soft play centre for many years. And there's a line in this where she talks about like ketchup and how much she now hates ketchup because it's everywhere all the time. And I've never related to anything more in my life because I also cannot stand the sight, touch, smell of ketchup anymore since working in that soft play centre. So, you know, point for that. That was funny. But Joey basically is very bored with her life and becomes obsessed with one of their neighbours called Tom Fitzwilliam. And Tom Fitzwilliam is the headmaster of the local school. And then you've got Tom's son, whose name I can't remember. Have I written it down? No, I haven't. But you've got Tom's son, you've got his wife, you've got one of the students at his school, a girl called Jenna. Jenna's perspective is the one here that I found most interesting. Then you've got Jenna's mum as well, who is quite severely mentally ill. And all these stories basically intertwine and you're flipping from chapter to chapter between all the different perspectives. I find perspectives really hard to say. Perspectives. You're switching between all these different like points of view, let's say. And you're basically trying to figure out who was responsible for this attack. I did find this book is a really interesting lesson in perspective, like the way that the writer can convince you so deeply that this person is evil, this person's in the wrong, just through the eyes of like all the other characters, and then you sort of switch to that character and you find out why they think the way they think and why they're doing the things they're doing, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, no, maybe they're not that bad after all. It is just all like people's different motivations and miscommunications and misunderstandings. You think you've got this book sussed very early on, you think you know the good guys versus the bad guys, but then it all like constantly just flips on its head. And the characters that you hate at the beginning of the book, you finish the book quite liking them. Just about how things can get taken out of context, how you shouldn't make assumptions about people without knowing the full story. I have no issue here with the writing of this book in itself. Like, the writing is really, really good. I love Lisa Jewell's like angle that she took this on from, if that sentence makes sense. I just didn't find the storyline itself particularly compelling, and when you've got quite a chunky book like this, like, it needs to be compelling. I just didn't really care. And that's that. Then we have another one from the bottom of the pile. We have... News from the Dead by Mary Hooper. I found this book at Winchester Christmas Market. There was like this little like book market where all the books were being sold for like nothing. I found this, I picked it up. I was obsessed with Mary Hooper when I was a teenager. At the Sign of the Sugared Plum and Petals in the Ashes, which were about the plague and the Great Fire of London respectively. Some of my favourite books as a teenager, to this day, still some of my favourite books ever. I really credit those with being the things to get me super interested in like history, particularly sort of the 1600s history, those and the Horrible Histories books, of course. I'm a Horrible Histories books girly, not a TV show girly. I literally said to somebody who's only like a few years younger than me a couple of months ago that I loved the Horrible Histories books as a kid, and they were like, there were books? And I was like, yeah, like, what do you think the Horrible Histories TV show is based on? Anyway, that's besides the point, but that just blew my mind. But when I saw this by Mary Hooper, I figured I loved her books as a teenager, let's pick this one up. This is about a girl who survived the gallows. She survived being hung. And it's really interesting because there's sort of three different perspectives. No, there's two. Three? Wait. It's two. So basically you've got two storylines running parallel in this book. So you've got the story of Anne Green, the girl who was hung or hanged. I never know which one's right. And it's like the story of her childhood and her teenage years and like the events leading up to her hanging. And then you've got the story of a doctor called Robert who was attending Anne Green's autopsy. Basically, it's an autopsy being done by the university to teach medical students. And you got his story, and he realises that Anne Green might still be alive. She's literally lying on the slab about to be dissected, and he realises that she's breathing. And it's basically, I don't really care for Robert's story. There's a lot about like Robert himself. He is a doctor in training, he's got a stutter. Like, I think a book about him on his own would be interesting, but in comparison with like the story of Anne Green and all that she went through, I just didn't really find myself that endeared to Robert as a character. Like, the most interesting thing about his story is like the scientific angle of it, like him actually trying to figure out, along with all these other doctors, if Anne is still alive. Like, the stuff about him personally, it didn't really care. But the story of Anne and her childhood and like the events leading up to this, that is interesting. I did actually only give this about 3.5 stars. I did find it really interesting, but I found myself skim reading at certain bits, especially over like Robert's story and the earlier years of Anne's childhood. I wanted to get to like the meat of it. I wanted to get to like, is Anne Green really alive or not? Is this some sort of fluke? Is the doctor just wrong? You spend over half the book being like, is she alive? Is she not? And each time like there's about to be something juicy, they like switch back to like Anne's childhood, and I'm like, I just don't really care. I just want to like find out what's going on. I want to find out the science and the sort of history behind this. It is based on a true story. I wanted to learn as much as I could about Anne, and I just didn't really care for the other angles of the story. But I did leave this book like just enthralled, and I have spent a lot of time doing research on Anne herself. I do want to do a video about her for my history series. I liked it. This is labelled YA. I don't really think this is a YA book, if I'm being honest. Like, the writing style is angled towards YA, but the themes throughout this book are really, really awful. It's just about, I can't really say what the awful themes of this book are without ruining what the story is about. But basically it's about a teenage girl, Anne Green. She goes to work for this like rich family, and she's basically coerced into sex by the master of the house, or like the master's son, and she is just like repeatedly assaulted. It's a story of misogyny and the things women had to face in this time. It's awful, but it's fascinating. The Appeal by Janice Hallett. I did not expect to love this book as much as I did, but I ended up giving this 4 stars, but like a solid 4 stars, maybe even 4.5 stars. I really, really enjoyed this book. I think it was the cover of this book that kind of gave me the wrong impression of what this book was about. I thought it was going to be like a Miss Marple, like Midsummer Murders kind of boring old murder mystery. It's not. This is fascinating. So this is a modern day epistolary kind of book. So epistolary is a book that's told in the form of letters. This book is told in the form of mostly emails. So the premise here, you've got 2 lawyers or 2 law students called Charlotte and Femi, and they have been tasked with the job of reading through like hundreds and hundreds of emails between the members of a amateur theatre club, I suppose, called the Fairway Players. Basically, one of the members of the Fairway Players has ended up dead, and Charlotte and Femi have been tasked with the job of reading through all this correspondence and finding out who is dodgy, who is not, what's really going on. This book has an extensive cast. I do feel like they could have done with culling a couple of characters. Luckily, somewhere towards the beginning of this book, when Charlotte and Femi are like corresponding themselves about all the emails, they sort of lay out who all the main characters are here and like what their role is within the Fairway Players group. So you can keep referring back to that when you're getting a little bit confused about who's who. For example, there's one character that really has like nothing to do with the plot of the story, but she is really funny. I can't even remember what her name is, but it's basically this old lady who, she's getting all the emails from this like theatre group, and she just has no idea what's going on ever. She like replies like, is this spam? To like a very perfectly normal email, and she's just like constantly confused in the way that old ladies are. Oh yeah, here we go. Here's like the list of all the characters that you can keep referring back to, which is really handy. What is the old lady called? She was just like completely irrelevant to the story, but really, really funny. She kept making me laugh. Oh, I think it was Margaret Deering, 88 years old. Just so funny. She's funny. The rest of the book is actually quite tragic. So basically you've got the main family who like run this Fairway Players group, who are called, why did I just close that and lose the list? So you've got the Haywoods, who are like the chair people of this Fairway Players Club, and their granddaughter has basically been found to have a really, really incurable, serious form of cancer. And so they basically embark on this fundraising mission so they can get funding for the care that Poppy needs, their granddaughter. So everyone in the Fairway Players group is like obsessed with fundraising for this kid, and that is basically what the main plot of the book is. And then somebody is also dead in the midst of all this fundraising. There's like this entire microcosm of society within this theatre group. Like you've got all these different like levels of class, all these different types of people. It was really interesting to see how they sort of interacted with one another in the emails, how two-faced some of the people are. So you have one email from somebody like replying directly to like the group as a whole, then they're like emailing another character or another person in the group like individually, like bitching about it. I really love that sort of like attention to detail. There's one character in this book that made me want to actually tear my hair out. There's a character called Isabel, who I would say is probably like the main character in this book, if there is such a thing as a main character within this. Isabel is so drippy and so annoying. She just really wound me up, and that kind of did like lend to a slight disenjoyment of the book, I suppose. I just found when I was reading her emails, like I was really frustrated with her, which I suppose is really good writing from Janice Halleck. She is meant to be annoying, but like she was so annoying that I actually wanted to throw this book at some points. Because this book is all just like emails, I don't know how much you can see, sorry. Emails, and then you've got like text, and you've got some like newspaper articles. It is super, super fast to read through, even though it's one chunk of a book. If you like want to sit down in one evening and just like zoom through this, you really, really can do that. Also, I really enjoyed that this book it like does genuinely give you all the clues that you need to solve this murder. I think a lot of mystery thrillers will like make you think that you can like solve the mystery as you read through the book, but like you really can't until all the information is divulged at the very end in always this big twist. In this book, if you're paying attention, you genuinely can figure things out, which I really, really enjoyed. It's made me want to reread the book so I can like pick out all the things that I might have missed the first time. I thought it was super clever. I really enjoyed this. 4.5 stars. I do actually have the second book in the series, The Twyford Code, to read as well, and I'm excited to read that. Some people do say The Twyford Code is worse. Some people say it's better, so I'm intrigued. And then we have One by One by Ruth Ware. Now, I don't really know what star rating to give this book, because I actually gave this when I first read it 4 stars. But if you're comparing like this, which I gave 4 stars, maybe in hindsight 4.5 stars, and then this, there's no comparison. Like this is a million times better than this. But I did still enjoy this book a lot more than I thought I was going to. So One by One also features a very drippy main character who also really annoyed me. So in this book, you're switching between perspectives. Why do I struggle so much to say that word? That is a really unfortunate word to not be able to say when you have a book channel. So you're switching between the characters of Liz, who I'll talk about more in a second, and Erin. So Erin is basically the person who runs this ski chalet. She is the personal assistant, I suppose I should say, to whoever is renting the ski chalet at a time. I'm sure there's like an actual name. She's like a host. She's a ski chalet host. So Erin is hosting this ski chalet, and then there's this tech startup called Snoop who have rented the chalet for a week, and they're basically on this like company retreat. And then there's Liz, the other why can't I say the word? The other perspective. So Liz used to work for Snoop, but she has since left the company, but she's also been invited on this sort of employee retreat, but she's not entirely sure why, or so you'd think. But like nobody really knows why Liz is there when she hasn't actually worked at the company in quite a while. Liz is very quiet, she's shy, she's so drippy again. I really hate just like really drippy sad characters in books. It really annoys me. It's just like, just stand up for yourself, you know, stand up for yourself. And so you're switching between these two perspectives as people are getting murdered in the chalet one by one, and then there's this massive avalanche and everyone is trapped. So it's basically a locked in mystery. People are slowly dying one by one, and there has to be somebody who's in the chalet who is responsible for the murders. One thing I did struggle with this book is that by about halfway through this book, so many people have been murdered that really there's only one viable option left as to who is the one doing it. So by about halfway through this book, you know exactly what's going on. I don't think you're supposed to know, but if you just like have any sort of powers of deduction at all, you'll know. Ruth Ware does throw in a few red herrings to kind of like make you doubt yourself, but really, again, it's only possible for it to be one person. So from that point, it's not so much a whodunit as it is a why done it. Why did this person commit all these murders? Or what is the motivation? Which, it depends. If you like a why done it instead of a whodunit, then maybe you'll really like this book. I'm saying all this, I did actually enjoy this. I did like this book. It kept me turning the pages. I read this really quickly. It's super gripping. I think in hindsight, I'd probably lower this down to a 3.5 star rather than 4 star. But again, I really enjoyed it. I'm actually on a mission to try and read as many Ruth Ware books as I can. And by as many as I can, I mean all of them. I'm going to try and read all of them. I don't want to buy them all like brand new, but whenever I see a Ruth Ware book in a charity shop, I'm always going to pick it up because I'd like to read them all and then eventually one day sort of do a ranking video of all of her books. They're just easy to read, you know? Also, I'd quite like to do the same with Lisa Jewell as well. We have the Falling in Love montage by Kira Smith. I gave this like a 3.75 stars, maybe 4 stars if I'm feeling generous. I read Not My Problem by Kira Smith and I loved that book so much. I think I gave that 5 stars, and so many of you in the comments were like, if you like Not My Problem, you'll love the Falling in Love montage even more. I'm here to tell you, I actually prefer Not My Problem. This is still a good book, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't beat Not My Problem. I'm sorry, it doesn't. So again, this is a coming of age sapphic YA book, but it's kind of in this rom-com style, which I really, really love. There is a huge lack of representation for women-loving women in the rom-com world. I'm still waiting for that one really good sapphic rom-com. It's out there somewhere. Somebody just needs to make it. I know there's been attempts. People have tried. Nobody's made a good one yet. So in this book, our two love interests are Saoirse, who is this sort of like grumpy lesbian. She's kind of jaded by the world. She doesn't want a relationship after she came out of a relationship quite recently and it kind of like just imploded her entire life. She's dealing with a lot going on at home. She's just like grumpy stereotype. And then you've got Ruby, who's this very like rose tinted glasses, glass half full, very like peppy, happy teenage girl, and the two meet and they kind of immediately hit it off. And I think it's quite clear from very early on in the book that Ruby like wants something serious, but she is actually only visiting Ireland for a few months over the summer for reasons that you come to find out. So she knows there's kind of got to be an end date on this relationship, like whatever this relationship entails. So instead of embarking on a real relationship, the pair decide to live a rom-com summer. They decide to live the falling in love montage that's in basically every rom-com ever. Things like talking on the phone until you fall asleep and going to a fun fair and like skinny dipping, things like that. They're going to do all the fun things of rom-com without all of the hard things like the heartbreak and the difficult conversations. Only the problem with the falling in love montage is at the end of it, the couple are always in love. And that's kind of like a given in this book. Like clearly that's what this book is about. That's what's going to happen at the end. But there are obstacles to overcome on the way. There is a lot of sort of like miscommunication. Actually, no, not even miscommunication. There's just a huge lack of communication in this book, which I'm sure I've said many times already on this book channel. That is a huge bugbear of mine. A lot of the time it feels like a crutch used by authors to like, just for the purpose of keeping a storyline going. They just rely on like, oh, let's not have these two characters say these very obvious things they should say to each other to solve this problem that they're having. But in this book, there's good motivations behind why Saoirse doesn't really want to communicate what she's really feeling. she's going through a lot at home. Her mum has got early onset dementia and is actually in a care home. Her dad has sort of like moved on into another relationship and she just doesn't know how to feel about that. And she doesn't want to burden Ruby with all of that that's going on at home, whilst at the same time there's a reason why Ruby is an island, not at home in England. And Ruby doesn't really want to talk about that either. And there's good motives behind the miscommunication. I don't hate miscommunication as a trope in general, there's just got to be a good reason for it. All in all, this book is really cute whilst dealing with some very heavy, hard-hitting topics, but it's never so heavy that you want to like put the book down and just like forget about for a couple days. Like, you can carry on reading because the cuteness sort of like balances out the really hard, heavy stuff. I enjoyed it. It's cute. I would recommend it. Next up, we have Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney. I gave this 3 stars when I first read it. I feel like I was being generous because I must have read this 5 weeks ago now, maybe 6 weeks ago. I can barely remember anything about this plot. I've literally just had to Google it so I can remember what the hell this book was about. So basically this book is about a woman called Amber Reynolds, and she wakes up, first chapter of the book, she wakes up from a coma. Actually no, she doesn't wake up from a coma, she wakes up from like unconsciousness, but she's still in a coma. Basically she's locked in, she is very aware of what's going on around her, she can like hear what's going on around her, she can think, only she can't move her body, she can't open her eyes, nobody knows that she is actually like conscious in her comatose body. So basically you've got 3 different storylines running throughout this book. You've got Amber, who's currently in hospital, she's got people coming to visit her, people holding conversations around her bedside thinking that she can't hear them, she can. Then you've got Amber in the days leading up to the coma, what happened to put her in the coma. I think it's like 3 or 4 days beforehand. And then you've got a 3rd storyline, which basically these letters, these diary entries written by a young girl in the 90s, and you don't know who it is who's writing these diary entries. You assume it's Amber, but you don't know for sure. And so you've got these 3 sort of storylines running parallel to each other, all sort of slowly culminating in the answer, what happened to Amber, why is she in this coma, who put her in this coma. She basically, I think she had a car crash, and the question is whether the car crash was an accident or wasn't it? Did somebody cause this? That is all I can tell you about this book. I read this whole thing. I can't really remember the details of this book. I can remember that this was full of every cliche in this book. Every possible bad thing that could happen to this woman, to Amber, happened to her in the days leading up to her ending up in a coma. Like, there's sexual assault, there's rape, there's murder, I think. Was there murder? Maybe. I can't remember this bloody book. But all these terrible things happened to her in just this 3-day period. It's like Alice Feeney was like, let's throw everything at this book and hope that some things make sense, when really nothing makes that much sense. I just feel like this book needed some serious editing. Like, it needed at least 2 more rounds of editing to like cut out some of the sort of points in this book that just don't add anything to the story apart from just pure trauma and tragedy. This is just like trauma porn in a book. As I'm saying this out loud, this definitely doesn't deserve 3 stars. This is getting downgraded to like a 2.5, maybe 2. The only reason I'm even giving it that is because I did read it quite quickly. It was clearly quite a page turner for me, but I finished it. I don't remember anything about it. There is a twist at the end of this book which is just absolutely ridiculous. I don't love it when sort of psychological thriller writers include like a last twist in like the last 2-3 pages of a book just for like the sake of like shock value. Sometimes it can like make sense, sometimes it works in a book, sometimes, like in this one, I don't really think it worked. I feel like, again, Alice Feeney was just like throwing everything and just hoping something stuck. Wow, it's a good job I'm reviewing books, isn't it? My grasp on the English language is really, really good. And then we have these 4 books, which I am not going to review. I'm just going to really quickly zoom through them because I did do a whole video doing in-depth reviews as I read these books. So we have The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, we have The Spanish Love Deception by Eleanor Armus, we have November 9 by Colleen Hoover, and You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. I read these as part of my lesbian read straight romance video, and the only book here that I would say is worth reading is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I actually really enjoyed this. Again, if you want my full review, go and watch that other video. I'll link it down below. The Spanish Love Deception and You and Me on Vacation are both very just like meh. If you're straight, if you enjoy straight romance, you would probably enjoy these books. As a lesbian reading straight romance, I just thought these were like not good. Sexual Chemistry? Where is Sexual Chemistry? November 9 by Colleen Hoover. Oh my god, my pile is about to fall over. November 9 by Colleen Hoover. Burn it with fire. This book is genuinely terrible. It shows you something which Colleen Hoover is trying to like tell you is romance. This isn't romance, this is pure abuse. This is an abusive relationship, it is a coercive relationship. This is not romance. I will scream that from the rooftops. This book was genuinely terrible. I gave it a 1 star. If I could give it 0 stars, I would have done. And then we have an audiobook that I listened to on Audible, that is Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates. The tagline of this book is From Incels to Pickup Artists, the truth about extreme misogyny and how it affects us all. This I gave a 4 star. Laura Bates is the founder of the Everyday Sexism Project. She has been quite a voice online for modern feminism, and because she has been that voice for modern feminism online, she has been attacked by men from every corner of the internet. So she was seeing all these men sort of parrot at her the same thinking points again and again. Like there wasn't a single original thought there. It was just these like anti-feminism, just hatred of women. And then she also goes to schools and she teaches about feminism and sexism, like everyday sexism in schools. And she also found that all these teenage boys, like 14, 15, 16-year-old boys, were also parroting the exact same sentences, like word for word, that these 40, 50-year-old men were parroting at her online. And she became intrigued as to where these lines of thought were coming from. Like, why are all these men, teenage boys, saying the same things? So she did a deep dive, and what she found was genuinely terrifying. She found these dark corners of the internet, and I'm not talking the dark web, this is available on the regular web for everyone to see, where it's just filled with these men who hate women. So from incels to pickup artists to men who don't realise that they hate women, but they very clearly do. This sort of like idea of misogyny and the patriarchy is so deeply entrenched. The chapters in this book about incels are some of the most terrifying things I have ever heard in my life. And I do true crime on the internet for a living. I am an advocate for victims' rights. This audiobook genuinely made me feel sick. It's one of those things you've got to listen to in short bursts. You cannot sort of, binge this whole audiobook. It will leave you severely depressed. So you've got to like do it in short bursts when you're feeling like mentally well enough to do it. Like, you've got these men in the world who genuinely believe that as straight white men, they are on the back foot in society. They believe that they are the least privileged of all society, and they believe that with their entire hearts, and they will do anything to try and prove their points, to harm women who they believe are actively harming them. Honestly, I could do a whole video just talking about this book. It has affected me so deeply. Laura Bates kind of like weaves this world perfectly within this book. I find with non-fiction books it's sometimes quite hard to like weave an intelligible storyline throughout. But she sort of follows the line from like these incel communities and how that kind of like filters down into everyday society until it gradually affects the minds of teenage boys who then grow up and they become the incels in these forums and so on. It's just this never-ending cycle that you need to break. You need to teach your teenagers, your teenage boys, your child boys about sexism, about how harmful it is. She has this really interesting interview with one boy in this book who found himself sort of like slowly falling into this community online, especially in gaming. Like, a lot of boys, they spend their days in their bedrooms with their headsets on talking to men who are very misogynistic, and that seeps in. So you've got this boy who found himself hearing this really misogynistic stuff, but because his mum had taught him about this kind of stuff from early on, he knew the warning signs, he knew how to get out of it, and he stopped talking to these people. I don't know, I feel like I'm not really doing a very good job at like encapsulating this book. It is just absolutely fascinating. It's just these insidious, like relatively rare thinking points that somehow manage to infect the minds of everyday people. Again, not doing a good job at explaining this, really not. Listen to the book. Laura Bates does a lot better job at explaining it than I do. But it's just the patriarchy. The patriarchy is the bane of my existence, and I could talk about it for hours. Like, even on Goodreads, every single 1-star review on this book, and there are a lot of them, is from a man, and a lot of time from men who very clearly haven't actually read the book. They've just seen like the blurb of it and have written this entire review based on this blurb because they've deemed it to be dangerous to like a patriarchal society because they're misogynistic. Honestly, go on Goodreads, look at the 1-star reviews. Every single one is a man. It's mind-blowing. Into the Water by Paula Hawkins. This I gave a 2-star. I did not enjoy this book. I read this last week and it was a slog. Let me tell you, this was hard to get through. I wasn't a fan of Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins when it first came out. Am I lying? Was I a fan of Girl on the Train? Did I just not like the movie? I don't know. That movie came out many years ago. I know I hated the movie. I can't remember if I hated the book or not. I think I did. I think I did hate the book. Anyway, we're going to go with it. I wasn't a fan of The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. I read it because so many people said it was amazing and I jumped on that train. I thought I'd give her another go. I found this book in a book nook at a National Trust place because me and my girlfriend have National Trust memberships, like the grannies that we are. I found this, figured I'd give it a go. It was £1. Wasn't worth the £1, let me tell you. That was a waste of my pound. So in this book, you're in a small community in the north of England, and this community has been plagued by something for many centuries called the drowning pool. And the drowning pool is basically this like pond, this small lake, I suppose, in which many women have found themselves dying, drowning over the past few centuries. And there's this one woman called Nell Abbott who is obsessed with the drowning pool. She wants to learn everything there is about it. She thinks there's like this like magical, mystical quality to it. And she has been doing like in-depth research about the pool and about all the women who have died in it over the centuries. And then, of course, Nell finds herself dead in said drowning pool. And the question is it an accident or is it on purpose? Like, did she commit suicide in the drowning pool? Actually, people keep telling me you shouldn't say commit suicide anymore, but I can't remember what the term is people say I should say. That's just like one of those phrases that's so like ingrained in society that you just say it automatically. What is it? What's like ended their own lives? It's not commit. You're not supposed to say the word commit. Anyway, besides the point. The question is, did Nell suicide in this pool or did somebody push her? Did somebody murder her? I thought it was so obvious from so early on in the book who was responsible for this. This book also has one of the sort of last 3 pages twists that I was talking about in one of the previous books. Oh my god, there's a car alarm or a house alarm that keeps going off and it's driving me mental. I'm just going to keep talking because I can't wait around. It is so obvious in this book who is the one responsible for this murder. I literally figured it out within the first 3 chapters and I spent the entire book hoping there was going to be some sort of twist that proved me wrong. But alas, there wasn't. I just got it in the first 3 chapters. There's not a single really likeable character in this book. You've got Nell, you've got her daughter Lena. I can't remember. Her daughter might be called Lena. And then you've got Nell's sister called Jules. You've got the perspectives of all these different sort of like town people who are like loosely connected to the pool, to the murders. And I don't really care for any of their perspectives, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. There is one from a police officer called Erin, which is just so like unnecessary to the plot of this book. Like, you could have removed the character of Erin entirely and it would have made no difference to this book whatsoever. Like, she's a police officer investigating this. She finds out nothing. Like, literally nothing. Like, what is the point? You could have shaved off 50 pages of this book and made it like a lot more readable for people. Didn't like it. Just didn't like this book. I really wish, though, this book is sort of like interspersed with chapters from Nell's own sort of writings about the drowning pool. So she sort of goes through all the people in history who have sort of fallen victim to this drowning pool and how they ended up there, who was responsible for the death and all this stuff, if anybody was responsible. And I found those chapters really interesting, but they're all like only like 2 or 3 pages long. Like, I feel like if you delved a lot more into like the history of it, it would have been a lot more interesting for me. I don't know. Also, like, the overarching problem in this book is misogyny and like the patriarchy, and like Nell alludes to that in her like report on the past murders, but it's like very loosely linked. Like, I feel like Paula Hawkins, if you're gonna like blame the patriarchy for something, like, you go all in, like, you provide solid evidence and like you really draw that point home. But it's almost as if like Paula Hawkins was like scared to like really commit to that being the root cause of the issue here. She sort of like tiptoes around it, which I don't know, I found it a bit like offensive. I was like, if you're gonna like commit to a storyline, commit to like a motive, commit to it, you know? Don't be scared. Just didn't like this book. And then finally, we're going to end on a high note with my only 5-star review of this video, and that is The Black Flamingo by Dean Atter. This book was just glorious. I actually listened to it in audiobook form via Audible. I highly, highly recommend that you do listen to the audiobook here. I haven't read the actual book to compare, but the audiobook I know was beautiful because this is a novel told in verse. Like, the audiobook just has this wonderful like flow, like the verse is so beautiful that I just feel like it won't fully be encapsulated in like book form. Maybe that's just me speaking because I don't really enjoy reading poetry. Like, this isn't poetry, but it's like novel in verse, so it's kind of poetry. But I loved it. I loved it so much. It was so lovely and heartwarming and important to read. So our main character here, the eponymous Black Flamingo, is Michael. He is half Jamaican, half Greek Cypriot, and he just doesn't really feel like he fits in anywhere. And this book follows his journey from childhood all the way through to when he's at university and discovering the art of drag and how sort of the art of drag really helps him discover himself and who he is. And again, I think this is a really important book considering the current political climate, especially in America around drag queens. I feel like in the UK there's a lot of discussion around like trans people, but drag queens aren't really vilified here in the same way they are being in the USA. I feel like drag in the UK has a really like deeply entrenched history within our culture, like pantomime dames, all that stuff. Like Lily Savage, for example, R.I.P. Paula Grady. Besides the point, what was I saying? That was a tangent. Anyway, this is wonderful LGBTQ plus representation and POC representation, with Michael being half black, and a lot of his sort of like struggles as a child is that sort of like intersection between being half black but also very obviously being queer. Like, he is queer but he can't really hide it in the way that when I was growing up I could hide it. Like, people would look at me and presume I was straight. Michael didn't really have that experience. Like, he was very obviously and outwardly gay, and it took him a long time to like come to terms with that. This book just says so much in so few words. I could feel like I was there in the room with Michael when he was talking about his experiences. I saw it so vividly, which I feel like is so hard to do, especially when it is essentially poetry. Is told in so few words, and every word has got to be so carefully chosen and so succinct, and Dean Atter just does a wonderful job. I've written here that it's powerful, captivating, emotional, vulnerable. It's about embracing yourself and loving yourself regardless of what other people deem to be your flaws. It's about self-discovery, and like, it made me feel jealous at some points because Michael has this sort of really wonderful arc in this book of self-discovery and really like discovering who he is and loving who he is. And by the time he's at university, or like in his second year of university, he is this fully fledged Black Flamingo being his like drag persona. And it made me jealous because like, I wish I had that. It took me a really long time to come to terms with who I am. I didn't come out until I was 25, and I feel like I missed out on those really like formative, important years because I was too scared. And then you've got Michael here who goes on this journey from being like a scared kid and like knowing he's different but not really knowing why, to just like fully embracing himself and who he is. And Oh, I'm gonna cry even just thinking about it. I thought it was just wonderful. I thought it was so beautiful. And ending on that high note in what I think is a very, very long video, I'm going to say goodbye. So thank you so much for watching. If you've got any video ideas for me, like anything at all, anything you want to see on this channel, then please do let me know down below. I have got a couple of videos planned coming up in the next couple of weeks if I have time to film them. But anything you want to see, let me know. Except if it's a part 2 to the lesbian reads straight romance videos, because I'm just not ready. I'm not ready for that yet. Maybe in a few months once I've gotten over the trauma. Not now. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.